When are there too many mechanisms in one game? Does it bog the game down, or does it make it fantastic? Let's find out. Okay, we're talking about mechanics and when there's simply just too many of them in a game. Sometimes games like to rely on one mechanic to really make the whole entire game function. And sometimes that is just not enough. Sometimes it's a great idea, the certain type of card play like there is in Red Rising, the pure amount of worker placement actions in games like Feast for Odin, or just the overall dominance of a map like you're doing in Pandemic or Concordia. But other games require a little bit more finesse. For example, Trajan by Stefan Feld. Trajan is a game that has 6 mini games that you are playing within the game. Now, people will argue theme about Trajan and all that stuff all day long, but that's not what we're talking about, and they're wrong anyway. So when we're putting things in a grand perspective, there's 6 different games in that little atmosphere you can do, making you have to memorize at least a minimum of 6 different mechanics on the board itself. There's a wheel, and on that wheel is how you select those mechanics that you're going to use, which in and among itself is a mechanic. The mechanic of doing the things you're doing, plus the mechanics on the board. And that is just 7 minimum mechanics that you are memorizing and having to know how to do, because you can't, in Trajan, not do those actions. You can't do none of them. I mean, you can't do all of them really well, but you have to dip your toe into several areas because of the way the wheel works and how that mechanic brings itself to the game. So, do I memorize all these mechanics? Is that a good idea? Or should I just do them as they come up? Or is that too frustrating for people? Deck building games have this problem as well, that the more and more games come out for, more and more expansions come out for it, Arctic Scavengers, Dominion, Marvel Legendary, Ascension, etc., etc., etc. Yes, that goes for a great collectionist mindset, and we could talk about that all day. But the problem with it is each set has to have a new refresh of cards. Each set has to have a new type of mechanic that makes that set separate and special from that of the others, if you're going to keep doing many more and more. If you're going to have 1 or 2 expansions, maybe not, but you don't know until you try it. So now, the people who are owning that game and having to teach it to people, do they just play base game mechanics every single time? They get bored of that and want to infuse it with more, or do they just want to do it randomly and just throw it at people and see what happens? It's a very hard balance system. You have to think of the play group you're with, you have to think of the game you're playing, you have to think of, are they ever going to play this game again? Or how often do I play this game? I mean, look at Marvel Legendary as an example. Marvel Legendary has a lot of cards in it, and each set either brings in new mechanics or uses ones that haven't been used for a while as like a callback kind of thing. You have to remember that. I literally have a spreadsheet. I play that game more than anyone I know. I have a spreadsheet that tells me and reminds me what the mechanics do, because I'm not going to get a rule book from every single thing. It's too much. So the extensive amount of mechanics can be game breaking or game saving. Games that are big and grandiose and have a lot going on need mechanics to balance the game, or else someone's going to find that one mechanic out of the like 3 or 4 that are there and break the game. Just by finding a way to do that and find that that's the best mechanic, that's the best way to do it, and it ruins balance. And creating balance problems can be the bullet to the head of any game. It can be the end for it. So having a lot of mechanics can save a game by saying, okay, there's so many strategies, good luck finding which one is dominant. Good luck. And I love having a lot of mechanics in the game personally. I really do. I hate teaching it. I really do. The more mechanics in a game, the harder it is to teach. That's just natural. But I love more and more mechanics being added to a game because it can make the replayability forever. Forever. Now that more often comes in card games or deck building games and stuff like that. That's just how deck building works. But aside from deck building, I love Trajan because, you know what, today I'm going to be the boat guy. But I can't only do boats. I got to do this too, because I can't, the way the wheel works, I'm not going to be able to do it every time. That's why I like wheels in games such as Praga or Sulkin or Glass Road. Things that control how I access the mechanics. There are so many mechanics in a game sometimes that just giving me free will to do whatever I want whenever I want, it can be bad. Games like Caverna or Western Legends that are sandbox games are different because it has a lot of things I can do, but it's not changing my access to them. It's just saying do what you want and strategize around that. But the things that you're doing are not necessarily mechanics. They're just worker placement things. So that can take that aspect away and not make it a problem. But when there's a lot of mechanics, it bogs things down.
Bogs things down.
The reason I have Orleans and Altiplano, for example, both games are similar in theory. In fact, made by the same guy. Orleans, to me, is more basic and easier to grasp, easier to get your head around, because there's a lot of mechanics, but far less. And it's replayability is not as good unless you go expansion crazy like I have. However, Altiplano has, here's some new expansions, here's some new things, here's a bunch of islands you have to go to. Oh, you want to do that action? That's fine, but you have to do this mechanic to get there. Oh, you want to do this mechanic? Well, you have to go around this way to do that. And it makes you have to think about your access to the mechanics. Mechanic access is key in board games. You have to be able to be limited to how you get the things sometimes, or else every game's a sandbox and it's not fun anymore. And it doesn't even make sense. The more mechanics out there, the more interesting a game can be. But there are also games that do it wrong, and so wrong. I don't have examples off the top of my head, but sometimes games will go expansion crazy and they even say, don't add all these at once. But I'm gonna. Kingsburg, for example, is a game that added module expansions. And Kingsburg added those modules that you can mix and match as you want. I think they're all almost necessary. That game was a no keep for me until that expansion got into my collection and made it breathe perfect amount of life into it, because it didn't just add modules, it added mechanics. Or enhanced mechanics that are already in there. Mechanics is a very Euro style thing, not to say Ameritrash games don't have mechanics, but I sound like I'm like ordering a car replacement of some kind. Like just, no. There are mechanics in both types of games, but Euro games rely on the mechanics over the theme. Ameritrash games prefer the theme to shine through, and the mechanics become secondary. As long as it makes it a game, it's fine. That's the difference. But in a Euro game, when there's so many mechanics because the designer's just like, I have all these great ideas for mechanics, let's put them in this game and see how it works. Sometimes they can overdo it. The Colonists overdid it. The Colonists is a game that has to take 3+ hours for a 2-player game because there's so much slammed into it. It's not slammed with content, it's slammed by mechanics and less so how to access the mechanics. That's why Caverna is a perfect game. It has not a lot of mechanics, it has a small amount of worker placement mechanics and things like that, and no barrier to access them, within reason. But it's just got enough mechanics to balance that out and not be too overwhelming or too boisterous for the person who's playing it. It's a perfect balance. Now, other games that are more Ameritrash, like Rajas of the Ganges, for example, that's behind me, the main mechanic is crossing your fame and your money. Crossing your fame and your money. Find a way to do that. And the worker placement actions is your access to that mechanic. Do the worker placement actions, build the buildings or the shrines or the temples or the pathways, and then get that mechanic to work. That's how it is built up. Sulkin has the gears. The gears aren't like normal wheels though, because the actions are on the wheels, the gears are moving. Every single time anyone does an action on those specific spots, the gears are always moving and make it a little different of a production. And that can make the game a lot more influential and a lot more thinky and puzzly and management-y. Because when people say games are puzzles, they're puzzly games, there are a lot of different puzzles involved, is because you have to not only figure out what actions or demonstrations to do, what the best ones to do are, but now you also have to figure out how to access them and how to incorporate the system into itself. And then you have opponents who can sometimes mess around with that system and screw it up and make it not work for you. But there's also games that are essentially multiplayer solitaire, which I'll make a video about one day. I think that's a good idea. But multiplayer solitaire games are essentially you're looking at your board and your actions. Your opponents don't influence them. The only influence among the actions you're doing is sometimes luck based on card draws or tile placements or access to stuff. And you are surely the only person who is responsible for your game plan is you. And maybe some reactions to the tiles or cards coming up. That is a game that just says, mechanics, figure them out. This is your puzzle, figure it out, based on how it's laid out in front of you. No one's getting in your way, but your access to your mechanics is your brain, that's it. And sometimes that can overwhelm people, thinking, oh my God, if I screw this up, then you can almost blame yourself for the end game result and know exactly why. But some people love the opposite and saying, no, I don't want that. I want to 100% know that I'm the one in control of my actions and in control of if I win or not. Very gamery. So too many mechanics is definitely possible, but not enough mechanics is also possible. I tend to lean closer to the too many mechanics, like right about here, if you had to scale it, if there's an imaginary scale right here. But mechanics are what make board game really run and function and deliver. So, are you a fan of lots of mechanics? Are you a fan of minimal amounts of mechanics? Let me know in the comments below. My name's Nick, aka Until May, and have a better day today.
Through the wastelands, through the highways, and